This is Gregg Zonnefeld. Gregg is at Central Wisconsin Christian, but also a member. And I don't know if you're an elder or deacon now. We didn't have that conversation. But a license to exhort, one of the many qualified men we have preaching around the Classis, and happy to have Gregg on. Gregg, since you're a first-timer, you get to introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm Gregg Zonnefeld. As Zach said, I attend First CRC in Waupun, have for the 30 years now that my wife Christy and I have lived here. We just wrapped up our 30th year serving at CWC, Central Wisconsin Christian. A lot has changed in our lives. A lot has changed in the life of the school during those years. We came right from graduating from Dordt College, now Dordt University, I guess. I always get that messed up. And this was a place we both could get teaching jobs. So we came here. I taught middle school for 4 years, then moved to the high school. I taught 1 year. Then I was high school principal for 8 years. And since then, I've been director of advancement. I've done teaching through all 30 of those years. I've been athletic director for 26, coached and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's been great to be a part of CWC. The way the school has changed from when we came here 30 years ago to now is mind-boggling to see what God has done. But also to see even in our own church at Waupun, at First Waupun, the changes that have gone through there. I served one term as a deacon and served a term as an elder, and we're real involved in small group ministry and things like that. We have 2 grandkids. Our oldest 2 sons are married, living in Indiana and Idaho, and our daughter has 1 year left at Dordt, but we had 2 little granddaughters, so that's a whole new phase of life that we are enjoying and reveling in as well.
Thanks, Gregg. I know your boys because they helped out at Camp Calvin in the past. And so that's another connection we have. I had the privilege of helping at senior retreat for CWC and got to spend some time with you there, and appreciate all you do for the school, and glad to hear of the growth and success of CWC and Christian schools around the Classis. Something near and dear to my heart as well. But we always follow up. Well, actually, before I ask you what you've been working on, you said you had a whole bunch of requests to preach this week, and just like gauging, how often are you getting that opportunity? How often is it at your home church, and where else are you getting opportunities?
Yeah, this week, for example, we're going to be out of town, but I had 8 different churches that had reached out to me to preach in the community. It kind of ebbs and flows as far as the preaching. Summer tends to be a little bit busier with pastors taking vacation and things like that. But I preach at several of the RCAs in the area, the CRCs. I always say our church, your own church is the hardest place to preach because, you're one of them, so to speak. But I do, we have 3 of us at our church who are licensed, so we all kind of rotate turns and stuff like that. But it's keep as busy as I want to be, I guess, would be fair. I try to limit it to about 1 time a month just because of the preparation time. And I like to worship in our own church, and we're involved there too.
Yeah, getting a chance to worship in your local congregation obviously is important. So you got to be careful about your time somewhat. But I always encourage on here, you're watching from a church and your pastor could use a week off. We have some really, really gifted guys who are available. So ask Gregg. We've had Terry and Bruce, and we'll get Scott and Al on from your congregation, and others. You can find the list. But I got to ask you about camp a little more because I haven't seen Trev in a while, and just how that has shaped your family's life, or at least your boys' life.
I think for all 3 of our kids, when we talk about spiritual mileposts in their lives, and I do that a lot with my students. I've taught senior Bible for the last 25 years, and we talk about what are these significant mileposts in your lives. And for my kids, Camp Calvin is way at the top of the list for that 3rd grade through 8th grade. And the boys actually, and counselors, serve with counselors as well. And I think those are just such great opportunities for my kids. It enabled them to make connections with young men and young women who were teenagers and young adults who really modeled for them a very real faith, and then just to grow and get to know other kids. I mean, some of Trevor and Cody's best friends that they had in their summertime stuff came through Camp Calvin. Sam Koenigs from Brookfield, both the boys had hung out with them. Cody would go to Summerfest and stay at Sam's house, sure. And they still get connected. In fact, they've had, when they both lived in Colorado, they had Camp Calvin friends that were coming through Colorado that they had dinner with. So it's just some lifelong bonds. And I think for Michaela too, she just, it's an opportunity to get away from mom and dad, to be blessed by really good speakers and to experience a little of that life away from that protection. And there's some nervousness that goes with that. But I think it is to me, one of the most powerful formative ministries that Classis Wisconsin is involved in. Yeah. Both my boys talk about, boy, if I could work it out, I'd love to go back for a week and be a counselor. And now they're dads and in their mid to late 20s.
We'd take them back in a heartbeat. I'm a dad and I still do it. So yeah. I mean, you talk about spiritual, mileposts. We hear that all the time in council meetings here when someone comes to make profession of faith. Hey, what's been a significant part? Camp Calvin comes up almost every time, and not to say that it's not without its flaws, or that it's for everybody, or that it's a guarantee that if you send your kid, they're going to get saved and they're going to be a changed kid when they come home. No, of course not. But it's near and dear to my heart, and I know your families too. So I had to ask about that. But the follow up normally here is, what are you working on? So, Greg, what are you working on these days?
Yeah, well, just the last sermon I preached a few weeks ago was one I've been working on for a while on Micah 6, verse 8. And it happens to be the Sunday that I preached it was when the Supreme Court information was leaked. And so just thinking about, the whole idea of doing justice. We've heard so much about justice the last while, and what is justice and what does that look like, and what is right, what is fair. But that whole idea really of hitting on what does it mean to really do justice. And one of the things I kind of laid out in the sermon as I studied it and read commentators, and even going back into studying what some of the original text said is, this active part of doing justice, not that we just simply sit and talk about it, and using pro-life as an example. Well, I'm pro-life. Okay, great. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And now, does that mean you're only pro-birth? And I think there's a big challenge coming for the Christian community right now to look and say, okay, we've since 1973 have fought abortion and wanting to fight this idea that, there are babies being aborted. Now a lot of these babies, Lord willing, are going to be born. Yeah. And are we willing to be pro-life beyond birth? Are we willing to say, okay, what investments does the church need to make? So that one was really convicting for me as I started. And as I started looking at it, I kind of was starting down one angle, and then had the sermon about 3/4 written, and then boom, here comes this Supreme Court thing. And it's like, okay, well, you can't ignore that on the pulpit. You can't ignore it biblically and tying that in. So that was really a really good growth time for me, I guess. And that's what I really enjoy about writing sermons and bringing God's word is, for me, it's the process of digging into the word at a way deeper level than what I would in my own time. Yeah. And that's, for me, spiritually has really been a growth time for me through that.
As someone who works in education with real young students and families of all different backgrounds, we've been wrestling here at Oostburg. How do we? Not everyone's called to be a foster parent or an adoptive parent, although we wish more people were. But how do we as a church support those people? What are some ways you've seen at the school? I mean, what are some safety nets, or maybe that's not a great way of describing it, but what are some things that the church can do to support families in need?
Well, having been in education 30 years, what we are experiencing, and I know it's in the government schools, it's in Christian schools also, is just the degree of brokenness and trauma that kids are coming with. Those that are really embedded and really involved, when these tough storms of life come along, they have a community around them. And what we're finding is sometimes we as a school need to become that community on a broader level than maybe the old sphere sovereignty would say we should. Here's the church, here's the home, here's the school. Well, given the brokenness, the needs that we're seeing in some of our families, we're having to kind of really work with the church on those, meeting those social needs, those psychological needs, those counseling needs, but also even as a school, we're finding we're dealing with more of that than we had before.
Yeah, I wonder, you kind of brought up the three-legged stool, right? Family and church and school. I wonder if there was maybe a better analogy, because those things really bleed into one another, don't they? I never thought about that before. But how much does the family influence the school, right? We've got parent-run schools, and sometimes the school has to step in and help the family, and the church supports the school, and the school, what percentage of our new families are because they found the school first, and then our church, right? Because we happen to be, so all these things kind of feed into one another, and there's maybe a better analogy that some smart person come up with than a stool, something a little bit more intertwined, like a cord of three strands.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Well, I kind of use the stool often with new families who don't understand this relationship.
Yeah,
and
right.
What I've done a lot of times in our discussions is I think there's two extra rings that tie those together. One obviously being God's word. And that's kind of what I would say is the bottom ring around that holds those three strands together. And then the other one that I think in today's world is that idea of community, that idea of belonging. People seem to have just a greater need today. And we're seeing in our church, as we really get more involved with outreach into our community, that idea of belonging to something, feeling that you have people around you that are willing to support you, that are willing to tell you, hey, you need to get it together, that are willing to cry with you, pray with you, help meet your needs. That doesn't mean just handing out to your need, but helping you work together to grow. And that's kind of the analogy I use, because we had a lot of non-reformed people, right?
Sure.
What's the school thing? Are you part of the church? A lot of people are like, well, do I have to go to that church next door, which is Bethel? And I said, well, I hope not. No, nothing against Bethel. But no, I think that's an area. And we're finding in our community, I'm part of a new ministry called Waupun, and it's a men's ministry that a few of us guys a couple of years ago, right pre-COVID, we started getting together one morning a week to just read through God's word. We'd take a book of the Bible, and the idea was you'd read a chapter of that book every day for a week, and then we discuss it. No curriculum, just pure, simple God's word. And we did that for a while. And then we started saying, how do we get more people into this? And how do we do that? So we formed One Waupun. It's an interdenominational ministry. And there's been some real neat offshoots that have come that. But our idea is that we're equipping men to lead well in their homes, in their churches, and in the community. We just feel like there's that real need for men to spiritually grab hold of what God intended us to do as leaders that way.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the time and the conversation, Gregg. I wonder if there's any way we could pray for you, or for the school, or for your church, or for One Waupun even. If there's any prayer requests you had?
Yeah, I think, here at school, we've launched a $16.9 million campaign, the largest in the history of the school. We're growing, and Sheboygan Christian is too. I know it's a real fertile ground for Christ-centered education right now, given the culture. So we're really in full bore mode, so people are like, oh, it's summer. You got to be glad you got June, July, and August off. No, it'll be a busy time. So I guess prayers for the school, prayers for our community in Waupun. In the 30 years we've lived here, I think there was a time where you felt like maybe 80%, 85% of people on a Sunday morning were in a worship service, and those numbers are way down now. And so we're really looking. One Waupun's things is Serve Waupun, where we go and help people that have needs and do a variety of different things. So that ministry, I think, is there. And as far as First CRC, we've been kind of re-energized with Pastor Gregg coming.
Yeah.
And through the revisioning during our interim time, we've really committed as a church that, our neighbors across the street and down the street in Waupun are very, very important. And it's not that felt like First has done a lot of great things in our community through the 30 years, but I think there's just this real bubbling up now of a broader group of people really committed to doing that. And that's exciting. That's really exciting to see kind of the direction the church is going. And I guess for me, I've been praying a lot for our denomination as we navigate the waters forward. A lot of the preaching I've done has been in RCAs, who now no longer are in the RCA. And we've had a lot of conversations. We got really close to some of those churches where you preach a fair amount, and a lot of conversations about the struggles that they've had and are still having. I mean, there's a lot of mourning going on with that, and a lot of discussions and just prayers that our denomination will navigate that and navigate that biblically and navigate it well.
Yeah. Well, thanks for those requests. We'll be praying for the denomination and the church and the school and Waupun this week. And thanks for your time, Greg. I'll let you get back at it.